For privacy reasons, names and places have been changed. This story is inspired by true events.
On a crisp autumn morning in September 1993, 31-year-old Faith Harper set out from the medieval town of Astorga, Spain, continuing her spiritual journey along the ancient Camino de Santiago pilgrimage route. A former nun seeking personal renewal, Faith shouldered her backpack and began the steep climb toward Fontibadon. She never reached her destination. Despite an extensive search by the Spanish Civil Guard after the discovery of her abandoned backpack, Faith seemed to vanish into the rugged landscape of northwestern Spain. For 25 years, her family and fellow pilgrims were haunted by her mysterious disappearance on this sacred path. Then, in 2018, a weathered map surfaced among a deceased hostel owner's belongings, its margins filled with disturbing handwritten notes. This is the complete investigation into what happened to Faith Harper and the dark secrets that lay hidden along the ancient way of St. James. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from, and if you enjoy this content, consider liking and subscribing to our channel. Now let's continue. The ancient paths of the Camino de Santiago wind through the rugged landscapes of northern Spain, carrying centuries of pilgrim footsteps and countless stories. In 1993, these sacred trails would become the setting for one of the route's most haunting mysteries: the disappearance of Faith Harper, a 31-year-old spiritual counselor from Denver, Colorado. Faith had spent 8 years as a nun before making the difficult decision to leave religious life, seeking a new direction while maintaining her deep spiritual connection. The Camino de Santiago, with its promise of reflection and renewal, seemed the perfect journey for her transition. Friends and family later recalled her excitement as she prepared for the pilgrimage, meticulously planning her route and studying Spanish phrases. On the morning of September 15, 1993, Faith shouldered her backpack and set out from the medieval city of Astorga, heading toward the mountain village of Fontibadon. The day was clear, with autumn colors beginning to touch the Spanish countryside. Several pilgrims remembered seeing her that morning at the albergue, describing her as peaceful and optimistic, sharing breakfast with fellow travelers and writing in her journal. The stretch of Camino between Astorga and Fontibadon was known for its solitude, winding through remote villages and ascending into the mountains of Leon. Faith had planned to reach the next albergue by nightfall, a journey of roughly 7 hours. She never arrived. The first signs of trouble came when 2 German pilgrims discovered a backpack in a roadside ditch 3 kilometers outside of Rabanal del Camino. The pack contained Faith's passport, journal, and carefully prepared pilgrim credentials. Her water bottle lay several meters away, its contents spilled across the dusty path. Local authorities launched a search within hours of the discovery. The Spanish Civil Guard mobilized teams to comb the surrounding countryside, while volunteers from nearby villages joined the effort. Helicopter searches revealed nothing but the endless stretch of ancient trails and dense woodland. Faith Harper had vanished into the landscape she had come to find herself in. As news spread along the Camino, pilgrims shared their final glimpses of Faith. A Spanish farmer remembered seeing her pause to photograph wildflowers. An elderly woman in Santa Catalina de Somoza recalled offering her fresh water and receiving a blessing in return. These would be the last known sightings of Faith Harper. The contents of her recovered backpack painted a portrait of a woman in transition. Her journal entries spoke of healing and hope, interspersed with detailed observations about her fellow pilgrims and the characters she met along the way. Her final entry, dated the morning of her disappearance, read, "The mountains ahead feel like a gateway to something important. I sense change coming." The investigation quickly revealed the challenges of solving a disappearance on the Camino. The transient nature of pilgrim life meant potential witnesses continued their journeys, spreading across continents. The vast, rugged terrain offered countless places where evidence could be hidden or lost to the elements. Despite extensive searches, no trace of Faith was found beyond her abandoned belongings. As autumn deepened into winter, the active search for Faith Harper was scaled back. Her family maintained hope, traveling repeatedly to Spain to conduct their own searches and post flyers in villages along the Camino. Her story became a cautionary tale among pilgrims, a reminder of the vulnerabilities that could exist even on these sacred paths. For 25 years, Faith's disappearance remained one of the Camino's unsolved mysteries, her story whispered in albergues and recounted by veteran pilgrims. But in 2018, a discovery would emerge that would not only solve the mystery of what happened to Faith Harper, but would also reveal how her final acts of courage helped expose a predator who had long stalked the ancient Pilgrim Road. Lieutenant Rosa Martinez arrived in Astorga within hours of Faith Harper's backpack being discovered, knowing that time was critical in missing persons cases. The seasoned Civil Guard investigator had worked the Camino route for 15 years, but something about this case immediately struck her as different from the typical pilgrim mishaps and minor crimes she usually encountered. The investigation began at the Astorga albergue where Faith had last slept. The hostel owner, Carlos Mendez, described Faith as quiet but friendly, saying she had spent the evening writing in her journal and talking with other pilgrims about their spiritual journeys. Several pilgrims confirmed this account, remembering Faith's gentle demeanor and her willingness to listen to other stories. Martinez's team conducted detailed interviews with every pilgrim who had stayed at the albergue that night. A pattern emerged from their testimonies. Faith had seemed particularly interested in the experiences of solo female travelers, asking specific questions about their safety and comfort along the route. One woman recalled Faith taking extensive notes during their conversation, though these notes were not found in her recovered journal. Father Gabriel Torres, who had spoken with Faith during her brief stay in Astorga, provided crucial insights into her state of mind. She was not a woman running away from something, he told investigators. She was walking towards something. There was purpose in her journey. The priest noted that Faith had attended evening mass and stayed afterward to discuss the challenges of leaving religious life. She had seemed clear-headed and determined, not someone likely to wander off trail or abandon her pilgrimage. The contents of Faith's backpack yielded few immediate clues. Her belongings were methodically organized clothes rolled neatly, guidebooks annotated with careful observations, and a small medical kit untouched. Nothing suggested a hasty departure or struggle, except for the way the pack had been found, thrown carelessly beside the trail with her water bottle some distance away. Martinez focused particular attention on the last few kilometers of Faith's known route. Local shepherds and farmers were interviewed, their daily routines and observations documented. A shepherd named Miguel Alonso remembered seeing Faith pass by his flock that morning. She stopped to take photographs of the mountains, he recalled. I noticed because she waved to me and called out Buenos dias in careful Spanish. The investigation faced mounting challenges as days passed. The Camino's international nature complicated matters. Potential witnesses continued their pilgrimages, spreading across Europe and beyond. The rugged terrain between Astorga and Fontsabadan offered countless places where evidence could be concealed. Search dogs lost Faith's scent repeatedly in the rocky landscape. Lieutenant Martinez refused to classify the case as a simple disappearance. The positioning of Faith's abandoned belongings suggested deliberate placement rather than accidental loss. The water bottle's location, separated from the pack, indicated possible signs of a struggle. Most telling was the absence of Faith's camera, which multiple witnesses had seen her using that morning, but was not among her recovered belongings. As autumn progressed, the investigation expanded to include reviews of other incidents along the Camino. Martinez's team discovered several reports of women experiencing unusual encounters in the region, though none had resulted in formal complaints. These incidents formed a subtle pattern that would only become clear years later. The initial phase of the investigation concluded without finding Faith, but Lieutenant Martinez remained troubled by inconsistencies in various witness statements. She kept detailed records of every interview, every search coordinate, and every piece of evidence documentation that would prove invaluable when the case was reopened 25 years later. Something about this case doesn't fit the pattern of a typical Pilgrim disappearance, she noted in her final report. Faith Harper didn't simply vanish on the Camino. Someone knows what happened to her. As autumn turned to winter in 1993, the search for Faith Harper gradually diminished. The harsh realities of investigating a disappearance along the Camino de Santiago became increasingly apparent. The constant flow of pilgrims continued, each carrying stories of the missing American woman forward along the trail, but concrete leads remained elusive. Lieutenant Rosa Martinez refused to formally close the case, even as resources were redirected to other investigations. She maintained a detailed file, periodically reviewing witness statements and following up on sporadic reports from pilgrims who believed they might have seen Faith. Each potential sighting proved to be a dead end, often confused with other female pilgrims walking the route alone. Faith's family made regular trips to Spain over the next several years, their determination unwavering despite mounting disappointment. Her sister Sarah spent 3 months walking the Camino herself in 1995, retracing Faith's steps and posting flyers in every village between Astorga and Fonsabadan. The local communities embraced her search, with residents keeping Faith's photograph displayed in shops and albergues long after other missing person posters had faded and been removed. The investigation faced unique challenges that complicated traditional police work. The transient nature of pilgrim life meant that potential witnesses were scattered across the globe. International cooperation proved difficult, with jurisdictional issues slowing the process of interviewing pilgrims who had returned to their home countries. The vast search area, encompassing rough mountain terrain and numerous remote villages, made it impossible to conduct thorough forensic examinations of every potential location. Father Gabriel Torres continued holding monthly masses for Faith, drawing attention to her case and providing comfort to other pilgrims troubled by her disappearance. He maintained regular contact with Lieutenant Martinez, sharing any information that came to him through pastoral conversations. "The Camino brings people seeking transformation," he often said, but Faith's transformation became something darker than anyone could have imagined. By 1998, the active investigation had effectively stalled. Faith's file joined others in the cold case archives of the Spanish Civil Guard, though Lieutenant Martinez continued to check in with local contacts whenever she passed through the region. The case changed the way authorities approached safety on the Camino, leading to increased patrols and new protocols for monitoring solo travelers, particularly women. Faith's story became part of Camino lore, shared in hushed voices around albergue dinner tables. Veteran pilgrims incorporated her disappearance into their safety briefings for newcomers, using it to emphasize the importance of walking with companions through remote sections of the trail. The mystery deepened with each retelling, but the essential questions remained unanswered. The years passed, and the Camino itself evolved. More pilgrims arrived each year, drawn by popular books and films about the ancient path. New albergues opened, old ones changed hands, and the route became increasingly modernized. Yet in the stretch of trail where Faith Harper vanished, pilgrims often reported an unsettling sense of presence, as if the landscape itself held secrets. As the investigation's momentum faded, Lieutenant Martinez kept returning to one detail that never sat right with her: the peculiar placement of Faith's belongings. The careful organization of her packed contents contradicted the careless way it had been discarded. The missing camera suggested that someone had deliberately selected items to remove, rather than taking everything or nothing. These inconsistencies haunted Martinez, suggesting that the truth about Faith's disappearance lay not in what was found, but in what was missing. By 2005, the case had grown cold enough that it was rarely discussed outside of anniversary remembrances. Faith's family maintained a small website dedicated to finding answers, but leads had dried up entirely. The Spanish Civil Guard classified it as one of the Camino's enduring mysteries, alongside centuries of pilgrim legends and unexplained events. What no one knew then was that the key to unlocking the truth about Faith Harper's disappearance was silently waiting to be discovered, hidden among the possessions of a man who had watched the investigation unfold with particular interest. In the spring of 2018, a routine estate clearance in Astorga would finally break open the 25-year-old mystery of Faith Harper's disappearance. Maria Mendez, while sorting through her deceased Uncle Carlos's belongings in the old albergue he had operated, discovered a weathered pilgrim's map tucked inside a box of administrative papers. The map itself was unremarkable, a standard Camino Francis guide that thousands of pilgrims carried. But the margins were filled with neat, precise handwriting that immediately caught Maria's attention. The notes, written in English, documented observations about the albergue's operations and specific concerns about the treatment of female pilgrims. At the bottom of the map, a final entry read, "Must report this. Women are in danger here. Will go to police after reaching Fonsabadan." Maria recognized the significance of her discovery and contacted Lieutenant Rosa Martinez, who had never fully abandoned her investigation into Faith's disappearance. The lieutenant arrived within hours, carefully examining the map that had survived hidden in plain sight for a quarter century. Handwriting analyst Pedro Ruiz confirmed what Martinez had immediately suspected. The notations were Faith Harper's. The writing matched samples from her recovered journal, displaying the same distinctive loop in her capital letters and characteristic spacing between words. But while her journal contained spiritual reflections and travel observations, the map revealed a darker purpose to her documentation. Faith's notes detailed a pattern of suspicious behavior at the albergue. She had recorded dates, descriptions, and conversations with other female pilgrims who reported feeling unusually drowsy after accepting evening tea from the hospitalero. Some entries described Carlos Mendez watching female pilgrims as they slept, while others noted missing items and stories of women who couldn't recall portions of their evenings. The map provided a timeline of Faith's growing awareness. Initial entries showed mild concern, but as the notes progressed, her observations became more focused and urgent. She had begun connecting incidents, documenting a clear pattern of predatory behavior. Her final entries suggested she had gathered enough evidence to approach authorities. Lieutenant Martinez's team discovered that Carlos Mendez had died in 2005, taking many secrets to his grave. But the map's discovery led investigators to re-examine his tenure as hospitalero with fresh scrutiny. Former employees were interviewed again, this time revealing details they had previously been afraid to share while Carlos was alive. The map also contained small markings near certain locations along the Camino route, particularly around remote sections between Astorga and Fonsabadan. These markings, initially dismissed as standard pilgrim notations, took on new significance when viewed through the lens of Faith's other observations. Most crucially, the map showed that Faith Harper had not been a random victim, but rather a concerned witness who had stumbled upon a predator's hunting ground. Her disappearance was not a tragic accident, but the silencing of someone who had dared to document the truth. The discovery sent shockwaves through the Camino community. Veteran pilgrims who remembered Faith's disappearance came forward with their own stories, filling in gaps that had puzzled investigators for years. The map not only provided crucial evidence about Faith's fate, but also suggested the existence of other victims who had never reported their experiences. Lieutenant Martinez recognized that the map represented more than just evidence. It was Faith's testimony, preserved through time to finally expose the truth she had died trying to reveal. The careful documentation showed a woman who had transformed from Pilgrim to protector, using her observational skills to build a case that would eventually bring justice, even though she would not live to see it. As investigators began the painstaking process of rebuilding the case around this new evidence, the map served as both a tragic final chapter to Faith's pilgrimage and the key to understanding why she vanished from the Camino that autumn morning in 1993. Her final journey had not been about personal spiritual renewal, but had instead become a mission to protect others from a danger she had discovered along the ancient Pilgrim Road. The discovery of Faith Harper's annotated map in 2018 transformed a decades-old cold case into an active investigation. Lieutenant Rosa Martinez, now nearing retirement, found herself revisiting familiar locations with new purpose, armed with evidence that changed everything they thought they knew about the 1993 disappearance. The investigation team began by thoroughly documenting every notation on Faith's recovered map. Each margin entry represented a potential lead, with dates and descriptions that painted a disturbing pattern of behavior at Carlos Mendez's albergue. The handwriting analysis by Pedro Ruiz revealed more than just authentication. The increasing pressure of Faith's pen strokes suggested growing urgency in her documentation. Martinez's team methodically tracked down former employees of the albergue, many of whom had remained in the region. Without the looming presence of Carlos Mendez, who had died in 2005, these witnesses spoke more freely. A former cleaner, Ana Vasquez, revealed how Carlos would often insist on personally preparing tea for female pilgrims, refusing help from staff. Another employee remembered finding discarded pill packets in Carlos's private quarters, though at the time she had dismissed their significance. The investigation uncovered a pattern of complaints that had never been formally filed. Women had reported feeling unusually drowsy after staying at the albergue, with gaps in their memories that they had attributed to exhaustion from walking. Several had lost small items of jewelry or found their belongings mysteriously rearranged. Each incident, viewed individually, had seemed minor. Together, they formed a sinister mosaic. Lieutenant Martinez's team created a timeline of Carlos Mendez's tenure as hospitalero, cross-referencing it with reports of missing persons and assault allegations along that section of the Camino. The pattern extended beyond Faith Harper's disappearance, suggesting a series of crimes spanning nearly 2 decades. The investigation faced unique challenges. Many potential victims had been international pilgrims who had long since returned to their home countries. The passage of time had erased physical evidence, and Carlos's death meant he could never face justice directly. Yet Faith's detailed notes provided a framework for understanding his methodology and identifying potential victims. Former guests of the albergue were traced through pilgrim registries, leading to interviews across Europe and beyond. A German woman who had stayed there in 1991 described waking up with unexplained bruises. An Australian pilgrim from 1994 recalled Carlos's unusual interest in solo female travelers, offering them special attention and insisting they take rooms in a separate wing of the building. The team's focus shifted to Carlos Mendez's property, particularly areas marked on Faith's map. The albergue had changed hands several times since his death, but the original structure remained largely unaltered. Ground-penetrating radar revealed anomalies in the garden soil, while cadaver dogs showed interest in specific locations marked in Faith's notes. As the investigation progressed, Martinez discovered that Carlos had maintained detailed records of his own, hidden within seemingly mundane business documents. His guest registers contained coded notations that, when decoded, corresponded to dates of reported incidents along the Camino. The man who had presented himself as a humble hospitalero had methodically documented his own crimes, arrogantly confident that his system would never be understood. The most chilling discovery came from Carlos's banking records. Regular payments had been made to a photography shop in Leon, continuing for years after Faith's disappearance. The shop had closed, but its records survived in municipal archives, showing that Carlos had regularly developed photographs that were never found in his possession. Lieutenant Martinez realized that Faith Harper had not simply vanished on the Camino. She had been silenced because she had discovered evidence of systematic abuse. Her map wasn't just a document of her final days. It was a testimony of her attempt to protect others, an effort that had ultimately cost her life but would finally bring truth to light 25 years later. The investigation team prepared for the grim task ahead, searching the property where they now believed Faith's remains might be found. The map that had survived hidden in a box for so many years had become their guide, not just to solving one disappearance, but to uncovering a history of crimes that had gone undetected along the ancient Pilgrim Road. The breakthrough in Faith Harper's case came not through modern forensics or digital technology, but through the patient work of excavation. In June 2018, guided by the precise notations on Faith's recovered map, investigators began a systematic search of the former albergue's grounds. The property, which had changed hands 3 times since Carlos Mendez's death, still retained the basic layout from 1993. Lieutenant Martinez focused on an area behind the old garden shed, marked on Faith's map with a small but deliberate X. The soil there showed signs of previous disturbance, though years of gardening had masked obvious evidence. On the 3rd day of excavation, at a depth of just over 2 meters, the team discovered human remains. Forensic analysis confirmed what Martinez had long suspected. They had finally found Faith Harper. The examination revealed blunt force trauma to the skull, suggesting a violent confrontation rather than an accident. Soil samples from her clothing contained traces of the same sedatives found in Carlos's private quarters, indicating she had likely been drugged before her death. More devastating discoveries followed. As investigators expanded their search, they found additional evidence buried throughout the property. A waterproof container held dozens of Pilgrim credentials, each belonging to a female pilgrim who had passed through the albergue. Personal items, jewelry, small cameras, diary pages were methodically stored, each tagged with dates spanning nearly 2 decades. The investigation team's most significant breakthrough came in Carlos's private study. Behind a false wall, they discovered hundreds of photographs documenting his crimes. Faith appeared in several images, clearly taken without her knowledge, as she documented her observations around the albergue. The final photo showed her writing in her journal the night before her disappearance, unknowingly captured by the man who would take her life. Carlos's personal journals, also hidden in the wall cavity, provided the final pieces of the puzzle. In meticulous handwriting, he had detailed his methodology for targeting vulnerable pilgrims. Faith's entry stood out. He had noticed her watching him, had observed her taking notes, and had realized she was building a case against him. His last entry about her was chillingly brief. The American nun became too curious. Problem solved. The evidence painted a clear picture of Faith's final hours. She had confronted Carlos with her findings, believing her documentation would protect her. Instead, he had attacked her, buried her body, but kept her map as a trophy, a decision that would ultimately expose his crimes decades later. The very qualities that had made Faith an attentive spiritual counselor, her careful observation, her detailed note-taking, her concern for others, had made her both a threat to Carlos and, ultimately, his undoing. Lieutenant Martinez's team connected Carlos's activities to 12 other disappearances along the Camino between 1985 and 2005. Each case matched the pattern Faith had begun to uncover: solo female pilgrims who vanished between Astorga and Fontibadon. The discovery provided long-awaited answers for other families who had lost loved ones on the Pilgrim Trail. Faith's final acts of courage had created a documentary record that survived her death. Her detailed observations, preserved on the margins of a simple pilgrim's map, had accomplished what she had set out to do: expose a predator and protect future pilgrims. Though she had not lived to see justice served, her meticulous documentation had finally brought truth to light. The breakthrough revealed not just the fate of one missing pilgrim, but exposed a pattern of crimes that had haunted the Camino for decades. Faith Harper, who had left religious life seeking personal renewal, had instead become a guardian of others, her final pilgrimage transforming from a journey of self-discovery into an act of sacrifice that would ultimately protect countless future pilgrims. In the autumn of 2018, Faith Harper's family gathered in the small chapel of Santa Maria in Astorga to finally lay their daughter and sister to rest. The ceremony, led by Father Gabriel Torres, brought together pilgrims, investigators, and local residents who had kept Faith's memory alive for 25 years. Lieutenant Rosa Martinez watched from the back of the chapel, reflecting on how Faith's careful documentation had accomplished what years of traditional police work could not. The discovery of her remains had brought closure not only to her family, but to 11 other families whose loved ones had vanished on the Camino between 1985 and 2005. The forensic examination of Carlos Mendez's property yielded evidence that transformed understanding of safety along the pilgrim route. Investigators recovered more than 200 personal items belonging to female pilgrims: journals, cameras, jewelry, and identification documents. Each item represented a victim who had passed through his albergue, though many had never reported their experiences. The Spanish Civil Guard established a dedicated task force to contact surviving victims, many of whom had buried their traumatic experiences for decades. Women from 18 countries came forward with accounts of staying at Mendez's albergue, describing similar experiences of memory loss and confusion. Their testimonies painted a picture of systematic abuse that had gone undetected for years. Faith's recovered map became central to pilgrim safety training. Her detailed observations helped authorities identify vulnerable points along the route where solo travelers might be at risk. The Camino's governing bodies implemented new security measures, including mandatory registration systems for albergue operators and enhanced background checks for staff. The investigation's findings led to sweeping changes in pilgrim hospitality. Albergues across northern Spain installed security cameras and implemented buddy systems for solo travelers. The Pilgrim's office in Santiago de Compostela developed an early warning system to track and respond to safety concerns along the route. Sarah Harper, Faith's sister, established a foundation in her memory, providing safety resources and emergency support for pilgrims in need. The foundation worked with local authorities to create a network of safe houses and emergency contacts along the Camino, ensuring that no pilgrim would face danger alone as Faith had. Faith's final resting place became a point of reflection for passing pilgrims. A small marker near the chapel in Astorga bore her name and the words, "She protected others on their journey." Pilgrims began leaving notes and small tokens, thanking the former nun whose courage had made their own pilgrimages safer. Lieutenant Martinez retired from the Civil Guard the following year, but not before completing a comprehensive review of cold cases along the Camino. Faith's documentation methods became a model for investigating similar crimes, demonstrating how careful observation and detailed record-keeping could break through decades of silence. The impact of the case extended beyond Spain's borders. Pilgrim organizations worldwide adopted new safety protocols based on the investigation's findings. The Camino de Santiago, while maintaining its spiritual character, evolved to better protect those seeking transformation along its ancient paths. In the years following the resolution, Father Torres often spoke of how Faith's final pilgrimage had transformed from a personal journey into a mission of protection. Her detailed map had not only exposed past crimes, but had created a legacy of safety for future generations of pilgrims. The former nun who left religious life seeking renewal had instead become a guardian of the Camino itself, her story a testament to the power of bearing witness and standing up for others, even in the face of mortal danger. The ancient pilgrim path continued to draw seekers from around the world, but now with added measures of protection born from faith sacrifice. Her final journey, though ending in tragedy, had fulfilled a higher purpose, ensuring that the Camino remained a path of transformation rather than terror for all who followed in her footsteps.